Two people walk into the same meeting carrying the same proposal. The first one presents it well. The logic is sound, the numbers hold, the answers to the obvious objections are prepared and delivered clearly. And somewhere around the fourth minute, you can feel the room decide against it. Nobody says anything hostile, the questions stay polite, but the decision has already been made, and everything after that is procedure. The second person presents the same material, same slides, roughly the same words, and the room moves toward them, heads tilt. Objections come out softened, framed as questions rather than challenges. By the end, there is a sense that this was always going to be approved. The standard explanation for this is charisma, presence, confidence. Some people just have it, which explains nothing at all. It names the outcome and pretends that naming it is an account of the cause. Here is what actually happened. Underneath the conversation everyone was consciously having, a second negotiation was running. It started before either person spoke. It was conducted entirely in posture, gaze, timing, and stillness. And in most rooms it is effectively settled within the first 30 seconds, long before anyone has evaluated a single claim. That second negotiation is what this video is about. Now, the internet has an enormous amount to say on this subject, and most of it is wrong. You have almost certainly encountered the claim that communication is 7% words and 93% body language. You have seen the micro-expression content, promising that a flicker at the corner of the mouth will reveal a lie. You have seen the power posing advice. We are going to deal with all of that directly, because two of those three have failed under scrutiny, and the third was never what people think it was. Building on them will make you worse at this, not better. What survives the scrutiny is stranger and considerably more useful. It comes down to a single asymmetry, and once you see it, the whole subject reorganizes itself. You cannot reliably read other people. The research on this is brutal, and we will go through it. Your ability to detect what someone is thinking or concealing is barely better than a coin flip, and your confidence in your reading has almost no relationship to whether the reading is correct. But other people are reading you constantly, rapidly, and with real consequences. They form durable judgments about your competence and status within seconds, on evidence you are not aware of transmitting. That is the asymmetry. The channel is nearly useless as an input, and enormously powerful as an output. Which means outsmarting someone without saying a word has nothing to do with seeing through them. It has to do with controlling what they see, in a channel neither of you is consciously monitoring, on which they will nonetheless base most of their response to you. We are going through 5 mechanisms. Each one is a lever with a reasonably predictable output, and at the end, there is a reversal that inverts the single most common assumption people hold about this entire subject, including, probably, yours. Let us start by dismantling the thing you were told to do. The dominant fantasy about nonverbal behavior is detection. The idea that with enough training you can watch someone and know what they are hiding. An entire industry runs on this. Books on spotting lies, courses on micro-expressions, television shows built around the premise that a trained observer can watch a face and extract the truth. The research on this is unusually clear and unusually discouraging. In 2006, Charles Bond and Bella DePaulo published a meta-analysis, pulling together several hundred studies on human lie detection. The question was straightforward: how accurate are people at telling truth from lies? The answer was approximately 54%. Sit with that number for a moment. A coin flip is 50. Across hundreds of studies and thousands of participants, human beings performed a few points above chance. Not zero skill, but nothing you could stake a decision on. And the follow-up findings are worse than the headline. Confidence barely tracked accuracy. The people who were certain they had spotted the liar were not meaningfully more likely to be right than the people who were unsure. The subjective feeling of having read someone is not evidence that you read them. Trained professionals did not escape this. Groups whose entire job involves assessing credibility performed close to everyone else. What training reliably increased was confidence, not accuracy, which is arguably a net harm, since a confident bad reading is more dangerous than an uncertain one. Why is this so hard? Because the assumed link does not exist. The whole enterprise assumes deception produces a distinctive physical signature, some leak the liar cannot suppress. DePaulo's earlier work, examining a large set of proposed behavioral cues, found that most had weak or negligible relationships to actual deception, and the few that showed anything were faint and inconsistent across situations. The nervous fidgeting you associate with lying is more reliably a signature of being watched and evaluated, which is exactly what happens to an innocent person under suspicion. So the first practical instruction of this video is subtractive. Stop trying to read people. Not because reading them would be unethical, but because you are not doing it. You are generating a confident story about a stranger from noise and then acting on the story. That is not a small correction. Consider how much of your behavior in a difficult conversation is driven by what you believe you are detecting. You think they are unconvinced, so you over-explain. You think they are hostile, so you harden. You think they are bored, so you rush. Each of those adjustments is a real change in your behavior, built on a reading with roughly coin-flip reliability. The mind reading is not just useless. It is actively degrading your performance. But notice something. If your reading of them is unreliable, and their reading of you is equally unreliable, then in any exchange there are two people responding to fictions. The question that opens everything is this. If detection barely works, why does nonverbal behavior so obviously matter? Why does the room decide within 30 seconds? The answer is that the channel is not carrying the information you assumed. It is carrying something else entirely, and that something else is far more consequential. In 1993, Nalini Ambady and Robert Rosenthal ran a study that has shaped how psychologists think about first impressions ever since. They took video of university lecturers teaching. They stripped the audio out completely. Then they cut the footage into extremely short silent clips, a handful of seconds each, and showed them to people who had never met these instructors, knew nothing about the subject, and could not hear a single word. These strangers rated the instructors on qualities like warmth, competence, and confidence. Those ratings were then compared against the evaluations given by actual students who had sat through an entire term with these teachers. The ratings from a few silent seconds substantially predicted the end-of-term evaluations from students who had spent months in the room. Ambady and Rosenthal called these thin slices, very brief samples of expressive behavior that carry enough information for observers to form judgments which, whatever their accuracy, turn out to be stable and consequential. Now be careful about what this does and does not show. It does not show that the strangers were correct about who the good teachers were. It shows that judgments formed in seconds match judgments formed over months, which could equally mean everyone is being influenced by the same superficial signals, all the way down. For our purposes, that distinction barely matters, and here is why. Whether or not those judgments are accurate, they are what you are being evaluated on. The room is not waiting for your evidence. It has already assigned you a position and will interpret your evidence through it. Now add a second finding, which is where this becomes personally uncomfortable. Thomas Gilovich and colleagues, working through the late 1990s, documented what they named the illusion of transparency. The finding is that people systematically overestimate how visible their internal states are to others. Participants told to lie believed their deception was far more obvious than observers found it. People experiencing anxiety before speaking believed their nervousness was plainly visible when it was substantially less apparent than they assumed. You have direct access to your own internal state. It is loud, immediate, and impossible to ignore. And you cannot fully subtract that access when estimating what someone else can see. So you assume the churn inside you is leaking out at something like the volume you experience it. It is not. The room is getting a far quieter signal than you think. Put the two findings side by side, and the practical picture is clear. People are forming rapid, durable, consequential judgments of you from very little information. And you have almost no accurate sense of what you are transmitting, because your estimate is contaminated by an internal state they largely cannot see. You are broadcasting continuously on a channel you cannot monitor, to an audience that is definitely receiving. Which sounds like bad news, and is actually the opening. Because an input that runs below conscious awareness is an input that can be fed deliberately. They are not evaluating your body language as a claim to be scrutinized. They are absorbing it as context, and context does not get argued with. So the question stops being what are they thinking, which you cannot know, and becomes what am I transmitting, which you can control. There are 5 levers. The first is the only one that has immediate, unavoidable force, and almost nobody uses it, because using it requires tolerating something most people find genuinely unpleasant. Conversation runs on a clock most people have never noticed. Research on turn-taking across many languages has found that the gap between one speaker finishing and the next beginning is remarkably short, typically around 0.2 of a second. Given that producing speech requires substantially longer than that to plan, the implication is that listeners are predicting the end of your turn and preparing their response before you have finished. That is the baseline, and baselines matter, because a violation of a baseline is a signal. When a gap stretches past roughly a second, participants begin registering it, not consciously usually. It arrives as a sense that something has shifted. Research on turn-taking has found that longer delays before a response are read as reluctance or disagreement, even when the eventual answer is agreement. A 2-second silence, in a conversational system tuned to 200 milliseconds, is enormous. It is the single loudest thing you can do without speaking. Now consider who fills it. In almost every exchange, there is a person who cannot tolerate the gap. They restate their point. They soften it. They start negotiating against themselves. Well, obviously there is some flexibility on the timeline. Nobody asked for flexibility on the timeline. They volunteered it, to make a silence stop. Every negotiator knows this, and most people rediscover it accidentally. Make an offer, then say nothing. The pressure of the unfilled gap does work that no argument would have accomplished, because arguing gives the other person something to push against, and silence gives them nothing but their own discomfort. The reason this is not universal practice is that it is unpleasant. Holding a silence you did not cause feels, from the inside, like failure, like you have lost your place. That feeling is precisely the illusion of transparency doing its work. You experience the pause at enormous volume and assume everyone else is experiencing it the same way. They are not. To them it registers as consideration. 3 specific applications. The first is the pause after their answer, not before yours. Most people pause to think before speaking, which reads as uncertainty. Pausing after someone finishes reads as evaluation, and it very often produces more material, because they will elaborate to fill the gap, and the elaboration is usually where the real information is. The second is responding to a demand with nothing. Not a counter, not a rebuttal, not a face. The demand has to sit there, audible, with its author listening to it. The third is refusing to answer an unasked question. People frequently make statements that imply a question, and most of us answer the implication. Let it stand. If they want an answer, they can ask. None of this requires aggression. It requires being comfortable with 3 seconds of nothing, which is a smaller skill than it sounds and a larger advantage than it looks. Silence is the lever with force. The next one is the lever with information, and unlike the micro-expression fantasy, this one has a real, measured, and surprisingly stable structure behind it. If this is useful so far, take a second to subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel reach the people who need it, and it costs you nothing. Almost everything popular advice says about eye contact is wrong, and wrong in a specific direction. The advice is essentially always more. Hold their gaze. Do not look away. Whoever breaks contact first has lost. This produces people who stare, and staring reads as aggression or as something worse. Sustained unbroken gaze is one of the most reliably threatening signals across primates, which is not a foundation for a business meeting. The real structure is not about quantity, it is about distribution. In the 1980s, Steve Ellison, John Dovidio, and colleagues, studying visual behavior and social power, described a measure now called the visual dominance ratio. It compares 2 things: how much you look at the other person while you are speaking versus how much you look at them while you are listening. The pattern they identified is consistent and, once you know it, visible everywhere. Higher status individuals tend to look at the other person a relatively high proportion of the time while speaking and look away more while listening. Lower status individuals tend toward the reverse. They look away while speaking and look attentively while being spoken to. Think about that second pattern, because it is almost certainly yours. Deferential attention while listening, showing you are taking it in. Then the eyes drop or drift while you talk, because you are constructing sentences and looking away helps you think. That combination is a status signal, transmitted continuously, that you are not aware you are sending. The reason it works this way is not mysterious. Attending closely to someone while they speak is a form of tribute. Your attention is going where they direct it. Looking away while speaking and expecting them to keep attending is the reverse. There is an important caution. Almost all of this research is culturally specific, largely conducted in North America and Western Europe, and gaze norms vary substantially between cultures. In many contexts, sustained direct gaze toward a superior is disrespectful rather than assertive. Treat this as a description of one set of norms, not a universal law. Within those norms, the adjustment is small. While speaking, hold their gaze more than you naturally would, particularly at the ends of sentences, where most people look away. That is the moment carrying the signal. While listening, allow yourself to look away sometimes, not dismissively, but you do not owe unbroken attention, and total fixed attention while listening is the lower half of the deferential pattern. The point is not to dominate anyone. It is that most people are transmitting a subordinate signal by accident, purely because of how thinking and attention feel from the inside, and correcting it costs nothing. Gaze is a signal you send. The next lever is stranger, because it does not just signal something. It reaches across and changes what the other person's body does. Start with the effect most people have heard of, because the more useful finding sits directly on top of it. In 1999, Tanya Chartrand and John Bargh published work on what they called the chameleon effect. People unconsciously mimic the postures, mannerisms, and expressions of those they interact with. Someone crosses their legs, you cross yours. Someone touches their face, your hand drifts upward. And crucially, in their studies, being mimicked increased liking. Participants whose behavior was subtly copied reported more favorable feelings toward the person doing it, without any awareness that mimicry had occurred. This has been turned into advice: mirror them and they will like you, which is true enough to be dangerous, because deliberate mirroring performed clumsily is extremely noticeable and reads as mockery. But there is a second finding, and this is the one worth having. In 2003, Larissa Tiedens and Alison Frigale published research examining what happens with dominance-related postures specifically. And what they found was that people did not mimic, they complemented. When a person adopted an expansive, open, space-taking posture, the other person tended toward constriction, smaller, tighter, more contained. When someone adopted a constricted posture, the other tended toward expansion. Not matching, filling the opposite role, and participants reported greater comfort in the complementary configuration than in the matched one. This is a genuine lever, because it has a predictable output. Your posture is not merely a display. It exerts a pull on the physical configuration of the person opposite you, and their body will tend to move toward the complement without either of you deciding anything. Two people who both expand experience friction. Two people who both constrict produce a strange, stalled, uncomfortable exchange. Complementary pairs feel natural to the participants, which is exactly why the effect goes unnoticed. The application is not to make yourself as large as possible. That reads as posturing, and in most professional settings it reads badly. It is subtler. Take up an ordinary, unapologetic amount of space and hold it steady. Do not contract when someone else expands. The contraction is automatic. It happens before you notice, and it is the physical half of conceding. Now, an important correction, because this territory contains one of the most publicized failures in recent psychology. You have heard of power posing, the claim that adopting an expansive posture for 2 minutes changes your hormone levels and your risk tolerance. The original 2010 paper made exactly that claim. Subsequent replication attempts failed to reproduce the hormonal and behavioral findings, and in 2016, Dana Carney, the first author, publicly stated that she no longer believed the effect was real. What did not collapse is the observer side. The claim that standing a certain way changes your testosterone is not supported. The claim that your posture affects how others perceive and physically respond to you is a different claim, supported by different work, including the complementarity findings. So the lever is real. It just does not point where the popular version said it did. It never worked by changing you. It works by changing them. Which sets up the question this whole video has been building toward. If posture, gaze, and silence all shape how you are received, the obvious conclusion is that you should control your signals tightly. Give away as little as possible. The poker face. That conclusion is wrong, and it is wrong in a way that quietly costs people everything. The model nearly everyone carries into a high-stakes room is concealment. Reveal nothing. Keep the face flat, the voice level, the reactions minimal. Give them no material. This is the poker model, and it is correct in poker for a specific reason. In poker, your opponent's interests are strictly opposed to yours, and information genuinely is ammunition. Almost no other situation you will be in has that structure. And outside it, concealment produces an effect most people never trace back to its cause. Consider what an unreadable person actually does to the nervous system of the person opposite them. We established earlier that people form rapid nonverbal judgments and act on them. That process requires input. When someone provides very little flat expression, minimal movement, controlled response, the process does not stop. It runs on insufficient data and produces uncertainty. And uncertainty about another person's intentions is not neutral. It is one of the more reliable triggers of a threat response. Ambiguity in a social situation gets resolved toward caution, because for most of the history of the species, an unreadable stranger was the more dangerous kind. So the person who reveals nothing does not read as powerful. They read as unresolved, and unresolved people generate guardedness, resistance, hedging, a reluctance to commit. Now hold that against how status is actually conferred. Joseph Henrich and Francisco Gil White proposed an influential distinction between two routes to social rank. Dominance operates through intimidation and the capacity to impose costs. It is coercive, and compliance lasts only as long as the threat does. Prestige operates through freely conferred deference. People attend to and defer to someone because they choose to, because that person appears worth learning from. The critical difference is that prestige is granted. It cannot be seized, and nobody grants deference to something they cannot evaluate, which produces the inversion this entire video has been walking toward. The person who controls a room is not the one giving nothing away. It is the one who is deliberately, cleanly, unmistakably easy to read in a direction they chose. Watch the people who actually hold rooms. They are not opaque. They are strikingly legible. You can tell, immediately, that they are unhurried, that they are interested, that they have already decided. Their state is broadcast with unusual clarity, and the clarity is the mechanism. It removes the uncertainty the room would otherwise have to resolve, and it resolves it in their favor, before anyone has to think about it. The mistake is confusing two very different things: concealing your state and choosing your state. Concealment gives the room nothing and gets caution back. Choosing means deciding what you are transmitting and then transmitting it without hedging, so the ambiguity never forms. This reframes every lever in this video. The silence is not withholding. It is the visible act of considering, done at a legible volume. The gaze pattern is not domination. It is a clear signal that you are not seeking approval, which removes an entire category of question from the other person's mind. The posture is not a performance of size. It is the removal of the flinch, the small automatic contraction that tells everyone your position is provisional. None of this involves hiding. All of it involves being unambiguous. Which is why the person trying hardest to be unreadable so often loses the room to someone who appears to be doing nothing at all. They are not doing nothing. They are transmitting one clear thing, and the room has stopped having to guess. There is one more lever, and it operates before you enter the room. In 1968, Robert Rosenthal and Lenore Jacobson published a study that became one of the most discussed in educational psychology. They administered a test to school children and then told teachers that certain students had been identified as likely to show unusual intellectual growth over the coming year. The students so identified had in fact been selected at random. There was nothing distinguishing them except what the teachers had been told. At the end of the year, the identified students showed measurably greater gains than their peers, particularly in the younger grades. The study has been debated extensively. Effect sizes vary considerably across replications, and it is strongest with younger children, but the core phenomenon held up well enough to become a durable finding. The label given to it, the Pygmalion effect, has entered general use. What matters here is the mechanism, because the teachers were not told to behave differently and did not believe they had. Rosenthal's subsequent work suggested the transmission was largely nonverbal and unintentional. Warmer manner, more sustained attention. Slightly longer waits after asking a question before moving on. More opportunity to attempt an answer. None of it announced, most of it invisible to the person doing it. The belief leaked through the channel we have been discussing all along, and the belief created its own confirmation. Now turn that on your own interactions. You form a prior about someone before you meet them. Difficult, dismissive, not going to agree. You believe you are keeping that assessment to yourself while you deal with them professionally. You are not. It is going out through exactly the channels Rosenthal identified: how long you wait, how much attention you extend, how much space you leave for them to be reasonable in. And people respond to how they are treated. Someone approached as an obstacle behaves like one, in part because that is the role being offered. Which gives you a lever with an unusual property. It operates before contact. Decide what they are before you meet them. Not naively. This is not about assuming everyone is friendly. It is about choosing a working assumption that produces the behavior you want, rather than absorbing one from your anxiety. The person walking and believing this will be difficult is transmitting that from the first second and getting difficulty back. The person walking and believing this will be straightforward, transmits something else entirely, and reasonableness is frequently what returns. You are not reading them. You are, to a meaningful degree, deciding what they will be. One more lever remains, and it is the one people find hardest, because it cannot be performed. It has to be actual. Everything so far concerns what you transmit. This last one concerns the speed at which you transmit it. Tempo is a status signal, and it is close to unmissable. Watch who hurries. Watch who begins answering before the question is complete. Who accelerates when the room goes quiet, who fills the transition between topics. Speed communicates that your time is subject to other people's, and the whole room reads it without anyone naming it. Now watch who waits, who finishes a sentence at the pace they started it, even under interruption, who does not accelerate when someone checks the clock. Nobody thinks that person is slow. Everyone thinks that person is deciding. Related to this is space. Edward Hall's work on proxemics from the 1960s described how humans use distance as a communicative dimension, and how those zones are culturally variable, but locally consistent. What matters practically is that distance changes are read as moves. Closing distance is pressure, increasing it is withdrawal. Holding it steady while someone else closes is one of the most quietly effective things you can do, because it declines the move without refusing anything. But the hardest and most valuable version of tempo is stillness. Fidgeting is the most costly nonverbal behavior in ordinary professional life. Not because it reveals what you are thinking. Recall the first segment. The reading does not work reliably in either direction. Its cost is different. Movement without purpose is noise, and noise reads as unresolved internal state. Stillness is the absence of that noise. And here is why it cannot be faked for long. Attempting to hold still while agitated produces a distinctive, visible rigidity that reads worse than the fidgeting. Everyone recognizes the frozen person. So stillness is the one lever that is not primarily technique. It comes from having actually settled, from having decided what you think before you arrived, so there is nothing running underneath the conversation to leak out as movement. Which is a real constraint on this entire video. 4 of these levers can be adjusted deliberately in the next conversation you have. The 5th mostly reflects whether you have done the work beforehand. That is not a disappointing note to end on. It is the useful one. It means the largest single improvement available to most people is not a technique at all. It is arriving already decided. Pull the whole thing together, because these are not 5 separate tricks. They are one mechanism approached from 5 directions. You cannot read other people. The detection research is clear, and the confidence you feel about your readings is not evidence. Drop the mind reading. It is degrading your behavior, not informing it. But you are being read continuously, from very little information, in judgments that are durable and consequential. And you are a poor judge of what you are transmitting, because your internal experience is far louder to you than your external signal is to anyone else. So the entire game moves from perception to broadcast. Silence, because it has immediate force, and almost nobody can tolerate it. Gaze, because its distribution across speaking and listening is a status signal you are probably sending backwards. Posture, because it does not merely display something, it pulls a complementary response from the body opposite you. Expectation, because your prior about someone leaks through channels you cannot monitor and tends to produce its own confirmation. Tempo, because speed is subordination and stillness cannot be performed, only arrived at. And underneath all five, the reversal. You do not win these exchanges by giving nothing away. The unreadable person generates uncertainty. Uncertainty resolves toward caution, and caution is resistance. The person who takes the room is the most legible thing in it, not concealing their state, but choosing it, and then transmitting it so clearly that nobody has to guess. That is the whole thing. You do not outsmart people by seeing through them. You outsmart them by deciding what they see. And the strange part, the part worth sitting with, is that almost none of this is deception. Every lever here works by removing ambiguity rather than creating it. The silence is real consideration. The steady posture is an actual absence of flinch. The stillness only exists if you have genuinely decided, which means the most effective version of this is not a performance layered over you. It is the removal of the noise between what you are and what arrives. So tell me, which of these five are you getting wrong? The silence, the gaze, the posture, the expectation, or the tempo? Put it in the comments. I read them, and the answers here are consistently more interesting than the video.